Hello everyone, I'm William Vivian, a founding director of Regenesys Business School. Welcome to this masterclass. Before I hand you over to your facilitator, I would like to introduce you briefly to Regenesys. Regenesys is a Johannesburg-based business and public management school with offices in Mumbai, India and Lagos, Nigeria. We have since 1998 been training and placing students in reputable organizations, helping them to achieve their goals by developing their management and leadership potential. We strive to develop analytical thinkers, problem solvers who are emotionally intelligent and value-driven, leaders who can operate successfully as we head into the fifth industrial revolution. Our programs generate new options for career advancement, wealth creation, and they will help you to expand your sphere of influence in our rapidly changing global environment. If your interest is piqued by the overview this masterclass provides and you want to join our online classes, you'll find more information on our digital courses and academic programs at regenesys.net. Your facilitator for this masterclass on blockchain is Nakul Shah. Nakul, who founded India's leading blockchain and software development company, Sate Development, is a creative thought leader and author on blockchain and financial services. He has years of experience in research, development, and deployment of blockchain technology. He also holds a master's degree in financial engineering from the University of Michigan in the United States of America. I'm sure you will enjoy this session in his capable hands.
Hi guys, and welcome to today's session. So the key objectives for today's session are going to be starting with how Bitcoin actually came to the market. So I'll start demystifying how Bitcoin hit the market, how it has evolved into blockchain technology. Usually when I work with corporates, when I work with enterprises, I see a lot of people using the terms Bitcoin and blockchain interchangeably. So I'll spend a few minutes initially to demystify these two terminologies. I'll talk about the relation between the two and the disparity between the two so that you all have a clear understanding of what Bitcoin is, what blockchain is. And even though Bitcoin might be in the gray area, there might be regulations, there might be government pressure not allowing people to use Bitcoin, but that doesn't undermine the advantages that blockchain has. So the first few minutes are going to be spent on that. Then I'll start talking about some of the use cases specifically of blockchain technology. I will talk a little about Bitcoin, but our concentration will be more from an enterprise perspective of blockchain and how it is being used in different industry verticals. And then I'll talk about the market outlook of blockchain, where it is at present and where it's expected to be in the next, say, 5 to 10 years. And finally, as Robin said, I'll open up the last 15 minutes for Q&A.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think it's a brilliant starting point. Let's come to an understanding of these terms. Could you please define the concepts of Bitcoin and blockchain for us? I think that's a brilliant starting point for all of us.
Sure thing. So post-World War II is when organizations really started using databases for their operations. And as the use of databases increased, people realized the need to start sharing this data, either within the organization itself or across different organizations, sometimes even across borders. This entire sharing of data was revolutionized by the advent of internet. Internet made it seamless to start exchanging data. But ever since the inception of internet, there has always been this missing piece, this need for a real-time, low-cost connectivity or exchange of value or through some form of internet of trust. This internet of trust has been a missing element all throughout. And this missing element, it further became engraved during 2008, during the recession of 2008. So prior to 2008, people used to blindly trust banks and other enterprises. In fact, if you look at the entire business model of banks and other financial institutions, it was based on trust. Because I couldn't trust a stranger with my money and I didn't find it safe keeping the money at home, I would go and deposit it with the banks, and I would expect the banks to hand the money over to me when I need it, or they could transfer it to whoever I tell them to. But in 2008, when the global recession took place and major financial institutions started going out of business, the trust that people had within the financial institutions started shaking up. In fact, there were a number of countries in Europe which were badly hit because of this recession. And as a move to overcome recession, they started putting limits on the amount of money people could withdraw. So basically what it meant is that it's my money in my bank account, which I have earned, yet I did not have the privilege to withdraw it whenever I want to. And that is when people started realizing that they needed a way in which they could start transferring money or anything of value, a reliable e-cash system, whereby on the internet you can transfer funds from one person to another without having an intermediary, without requiring a third party to actually settle that transaction. And this hope, this dream became a reality in 2008. Now, no one really knows whether it was just a coincidence or was it a planned maneuver to launch Bitcoin in 2008, because till date, it's been over a decade since the inception of Bitcoin. But the person who invented Bitcoin, it goes by the pseudonym of Satoshi Nakamoto. No one really knows who this person is. People don't even know whether it's a person, whether it's a company, a government, a non-profit. There's absolutely no clue. So it's just a simple white paper that was launched on the internet, which actually explained the people that there actually is a way in which they can start transferring funds in the form of Bitcoin, which is an asset class, which is a currency, a cryptocurrency to be specific, and they could do it without requiring any kind of third party, any kind of intermediary. Now, ever since Bitcoin actually hit the market, it has always been in the gray area. There are governments who are trying to make regulations around Bitcoin, whether to make it legal, whether to make it illegal, whether to put some kind of restrictions. There are banks, there are other authorities which are working some legal framework under which they could put Bitcoin. Some countries have called it a currency, some countries have called it a commodity. But while Bitcoin is in this gray area and this parallel debate is going on, another group of people, they started looking under the covers. So they wanted to understand what is this technology which has actually made the existence of banks moot. People are being able to transfer funds, they are able to exchange value with absolutely no flaw. The system is working seamlessly without requiring any kind of third party to actually settle the trade. And till date, so it's been over 10 years, till date there has been no hack on the Bitcoin blockchain network, there has been no theft on that network. So that is why they started looking under the covers. And that is when the term blockchain came to the forefront. So blockchain is basically the technology that underpins Bitcoin. It is what makes Bitcoin so unique. To put it simply, it is nothing but a decentralized distributed transaction database where you can write data, but you cannot edit it, you cannot delete it. So once something has been written on it, it's immutable, it's saved at that point in time, and it will be saved forever. So to explain it in a simple format, there's an analogy that I usually like to draw. I'm sure we all have traveled in a train at some point in time. Now, how does a train look? A train comprises of different compartments, and each compartment is tied to one another. Consider blockchain working in a similar manner. Blockchain also consists of blocks, and each block, apart from containing its own data, and to keep today's session simple, I'm not going to get into the technology, the specifics of what this data is, how it's generated. But apart from carrying its own data, each block is tied to the other block. And that is how the entire blockchain is made. Now, imagine if in a moving train, I suddenly remove one of the compartments, the entire train is going to collapse. Similarly, in the blockchain as well, if I suddenly remove one of the blocks from the middle of the chain, the consistency of the entire chain is going to get impacted. And that's why every participant who's operating that chain will know that something is amiss, something has gone wrong, something is not in place. And that is how it makes data immutable. It ensures that no one can tamper with this ledger, no one can maneuver this ledger, no one can manipulate it. So that is what blockchain basically is. Now, when we talk about the technical aspect of blockchain, it primarily comprises of four concepts. You have the cryptography algorithm, the decentralized network, the consensus algorithm, and distributed ledger. Now, these terms, they sound quite heavy, they sound quite difficult. And if you go to understand the technology, it's even more difficult, it's even more heavier, to be honest. But that's not the point that I'm trying to make over here. These are some concepts that we discuss in the more in-depth sessions that Regenesys has to offer. But the reason I have put this slide in is because a point that I want to emphasize on is that each of these concepts, they have been in existence since before the inception of Bitcoin or blockchain. In fact, you can take this as a go-to-home exercise. You can talk to your colleagues or your technology department or your CTOs and chief security officers, and you can mention these terminologies to them, and they'll tell you that each of these terminologies have been in existence for decades before 2008, so before the inception of Bitcoin. So blockchain did not give the world anything new. It did not give the world any new concept. The key aspect of blockchain was to use the existing concepts in a way that it hadn't been used in the past. And that is where the real evolution of blockchain started. So these concepts, you can call them the 4 pillars of blockchain. These pillars started being used in different formats, in different ways. And that's how blockchain started evolving from something that just underpins Bitcoin, or which is the backend engine of Bitcoin, to a technology, to a platform that can actually be used in different industry verticals, whether that's finance, whether that's media, whether that's healthcare. It could be used for different kind of use cases. And that's why today we have so many different blockchain platforms apart from Bitcoin. So we have Hyperledger, we have Ethereum, we have Fabric, we have Sawtooth Lake, we have n number of different platforms, all using these same 4 pillars in different formats, in different ways, the way a use case has to be made. One more concept that actually came into being with blockchain was smart contracts. So smart contracts gave people a way to start automating processes. Now, when I say it gave people a way to automate processes, the obvious question would be that automation has been in existence for almost 30, 40 years. So what's new in automation? Obviously, you're absolutely right. We have been using automation for quite some time. The key aspect here was that so far, whatever automation we use, it either is within an organization or it is among trusted parties. But if 2 organizations want to work together and the element of trust doesn't exist between them, then there is absolutely no automation over there. The obvious reason behind that is that let's assume a scenario. A bank in US wants to work with a bank in South Africa. Now, these two have agreed on some form of automation for a particular process, let's say trade finance. But the first question would be that who would write the code for automation? If the banker, the American bank comes forward and says that, okay, I volunteer to write that code, South African bank is going to back out. They'll say that, what if you manipulate the code to use it for your own needs? So they're not going to reach to a settlement. Let's assume they hire a third party and a neutral third party to develop that software. The second question is, who's going to host this code? Who's going to host the software? Again, the 2 parties are not going to agree to hosting the software, because what if the other party starts manipulating the code to bring advantage to themselves or disadvantage to the other party? So that is what the missing element was. Smart contract gave these organizations a way to automate processes, because once a smart contract is deployed on a blockchain technology, on an immutable technology, it cannot be altered, let alone those organizations. Even a person who has actually coded it, even a person who's actually developed that code, cannot make any alterations. So that is the key aspect, and that is how these organizations, these enterprises have started moving a lot of their traditional processes, their legacy processes onto smart contracts and running them on a blockchain-based platform, so that people can start doing business without the need of trust.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. I think those concepts, you define them so well for us. And I find it fascinating how the 4 pillars of blockchain aren't new in a sense, but it's the way it's being used that it was new, that has created this, this disruption in the field. And I find it quite fascinating, the element of trust and how that is something is very, very powerful, like you say, with the smart contracts. Could you please take us through the uses of blockchain? I think it's important for us now that we've understood the concepts. How can we use blockchain?
Sure, certainly, Robin. So let's start with a few industry verticals. I'll start with the first use case, which is the most basic and most common use case. It's in record keeping. Again, I'll start with a scenario. So talking about 2008, back when the global recession took place, apart from the people being affected, even a lot of enterprises were affected by this global recession. And the worst hit was the mortgage sector. So a lot of mortgage companies like Merrill Lynch, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, these companies, they got swallowed up by the bigger giants because they couldn't keep up. They couldn't manage the losses because their entire business model was based on mortgage-backed securities. Now, for instance, when Bank of America swallowed up Merrill Lynch, almost 18 billion documents were transferred from Merrill Lynch to Bank of America. These 18 billion documents, basically, they were mortgage documents. So normally when you take a mortgage on your home, you need to submit your salary statements, you need to submit your land title deeds, you need to submit your identity proofs, your passports, and a ton of other documents. So it's a package of 50 to 100 documents that you submit to your institution. Now, all these documents were transferred from Merrill Lynch to Bank of America, and these represented the documents that Merrill Lynch had collected over the years from the individuals and companies to whom they had granted loans. Now, at that point, Bank of America had to simply accept those documents. If they have their people, their employees go through 18 billion documents, the cost behind that would be enormous. So they had to blindly trust and accept those documents. A few years later, a few years after this acquisition, when the regulatory authorities came knocking on the doors of Bank of America, claiming that there has been certain discrepancies, certain documents have been backdated, certain documents are missing, Bank of America couldn't do much because they had accepted the documents, and when they accepted the documents from Merrill Lynch, they basically accepted liabilities as well. And they realized that it's just cheaper for them to end up paying about $13 billion in fine, as opposed to having to go through all those documents. Now, at that point, if a technology like blockchain existed, if the immutability feature of blockchain could be leveraged, all what Bank of America had to do at the point of accepting those documents is to run those documents through a blockchain platform and ensure that each and every document is in place. So in the previous slide, I had spoken about certain concepts. One of the concepts is cryptography. So the Bitcoin blockchain uses something called as the SHA-256 algorithm. Now, I won't get into the depths of the algorithm, but the basic function of this algorithm is that you can feed this algorithm data. And that data can be a simple line, a simple document, or it can be a set of hundreds or thousands of documents. And this algorithm converts that data into an alphanumeric signature, a 64-bit alphanumeric signature. And that signature is hashed onto the blockchain platform. So it's put into the blockchain platform. The unique part about the signature is that if you have the original data, you can regenerate the same hash signature multiple number of times. But from the signature, you cannot get back the original data. Secondly, if even a single decimal point is changed in any of those documents, the signature will change in a way that you and I cannot predict. So the probability that two different inputs give you the same output signature is so low that there are higher chances that this entire world will collapse in the next 5 seconds. So that's the mathematical proof around that. And that is what blockchain uses. So all what Bank of America had to do at the time of accepting these documents is to regenerate the hash, bounce it on the blockchain, and immediately they would have known if any of the document is missing, it has been altered, it has been backdated. And at that same point in time, they could have ended up pushing those documents back to Merrill Lynch, avoiding any kind of liabilities associated with those mortgages. And they could have ended up saving themselves $13 billion. So that's the extent of blockchain in the simplest form of use case. And this fate was also seen by a lot of other financial institutions between 2008 and 2015 who acquired or who merged with other financial institutions where document related discrepancies or records of different documents was either missing or they had been altered or manipulated. In fact, the same use case, the same concept can be applied to use cases like mortgage finance, land titles. So in most of the developing nations, over 50% of the cases pending in the court of law are pertaining to land title discrepancies. So people do not know who is the actual owner of this land. In fact, if you combine the developing nations like India, Honduras, and a few others, it's expected that $20 trillion worth of land is unclaimed. So there are some disputes, there's no clarity as to who owns those lands, and that amount of land is basically considered untapped land. You can imagine what an economy can do if that land is cleared, if that land is put back to use. So blockchain can help in record keeping of land titles as well. And lastly, the academic documents. So a lot of countries, they see fake academic documents that have been backdated or that actually do not exist. And using those documents, people, they take jobs, they grow in their careers. 10, 15, 20 years later, sometimes it's found out that they had backdated the document or they had submitted a forged document, and that entire liability falls on the company who employs those kind of people. So these are some of the use cases where record keeping can actually be put to use. So moving forward, the next use case that we'll talk about is cross-border remittance, a very common phenomena. In a year, over $500 billion is transferred from one country to another. And this is, again, a big use case, a very eminent use case from the perspective of blockchain. Now, before I talk about the advantages of blockchain in this kind of scenario, let me talk about how this transaction takes place currently. So let's assume I, sitting in India, wants to transfer money to my friend Robin, who's based in South Africa. Now, how does this process work? I will go to a local branch of my bank. I'll go and deposit some amount over there. And I'll instruct my bank that transfer this money to Robin's bank account. And I'll give them the bank name, the recipient's account number, and the SWIFT code. And after 2 to 3 days or 5 days, depending on what kind of relation my bank has with the recipient's bank, that amount will appear in Robin's bank account. Now, for these 3 to 5 days, neither Robin nor I have any clue where that money is. We both have to just sit and wait till that money shows up in Robin's bank account, and she confirms that, okay, Nakul, I have received your amount, and that is when we can start doing business together. Now, what happens in these 3 to 5 days? Once I have gone and deposited the amount in my bank account and instructed them to transfer it to Robin, my bank account first will go ahead and update their local ledger saying that, okay, Nakul's bank account is now credited with $100 or whatever the amount may be. Then my bank will send a SWIFT message to Robin's bank saying that Nakul from our bank is trying to transfer money to XYZ bank account, which is held by Robin in your bank. That SWIFT message can either reach within a day or 2 days, depending on how they are processing. So usually banks do something called as batch processing. So they collect all the SWIFT messages and then they send it all together. So depending on what their processing timetable is, it'll either take 24 to 48 hours for that message to reach Robin's bank. But just because her bank has received a message, they are not going to hand over the funds to Robin. They will actually wait for the funds to reach the bank account, and that is when it will be handed over to Robin. So this transfer of the actual funds will now take place through something called as Nostro and Vostro channels. So between the Indian bank and Robin's bank in South Africa, there are multiple other banks who act as intermediary. So the amount might first go to a bank in Middle East or a bank in Europe, and then it will finally appear in the South African bank. Now, because there are so many intermediaries involved and so many different parties who are working together, there are a number of drawbacks associated with this traditional transfer. It's slow. As I mentioned, it might take 2 to 3 days, 5 days. Sometimes it even takes more than a week for some kind of transfers if the intermediaries are too many. The process is expensive. So as you keep adding more and more intermediaries, the cost keeps going up because each one of them are charging their processing fee, and the burden of that cost falls either on me or on Robin. So at the end of the day, it's the people who are actually suffering the burden of that kind of transaction. And it makes the entire process quite cumbersome. Also, the banks need to maintain relationships with these other banks, with the FX partners. They need to continuously keep hedging the currencies because today the dollar might be 75 against the Indian rupee, but tomorrow it might go to 76. And when you're talking about billions of dollars worth of trade, that amount, that 1% or 2% variation or volatility in the currency also costs the banks a lot. So they need to continuously keep hedging the currencies, and eventually all the burden, all the costs, it falls on the end users. So currently the wire transfer can range anywhere between $30 to $60, or it can take 3 to 5%. Sometimes if you use other third parties, other platforms, it might even go beyond that. So it's a huge problem. It costs a huge amount of money. Now let's take the same process, the same transfer of funds, and we will put the cryptocurrency and blockchain aspect into the picture. So let's say if the transfer is happening through Bitcoins, all I have to do is open a Bitcoin wallet, put Robin's Bitcoin address on that wallet. So Robin's Bitcoin address is her equivalent of the bank account. So the way bank accounts operate on bank account numbers, cryptocurrencies work on the wallet addresses. So all I need to do is put her address, I'll put the amount and hit the transfer button, and within a few seconds or maximum of a couple of minutes, that amount will appear in Robin's wallet and it will be available to her. So it's that fast. Now, when we talk about this transfer of funds, there are two aspects to this transfer of funds. One is the cryptocurrency aspect, and the second one is the blockchain aspect. Cryptocurrency being in the gray area, being a lot of regulators are looking at it in different formats, so it might not be the most convenient option for all the parties involved. So they, especially for enterprises, banks and all, they do not want to get their hands dirty in any kind of thing that is in the gray area, that is questionable, or that might be considered shady. So banks want to steer away from that kind of concept, and that's completely fine. If Bitcoin could be used in this case, as you can see over here, almost 42% cost savings can be achieved. But for banks, that certainly is not an option, at least not in the current economic times. So even by eliminating the cryptocurrency aspect and by just using the concept of blockchain, they can realize almost 33% cost reduction. And this particular use case has been executed by one of the leading companies in the space, one of the companies who has actually built a platform by using blockchain in order to facilitate cross-border transactions. And they have seen 33% cost savings without any aspect of cryptocurrency, and by purely using technology to eliminate all the intermediaries in this process. So that is the amount of cost savings that we can look at. And this is just one use case, just cross-border remittance. Talking about another use case in this same concept. So supply chain finance, another huge industry, $2 trillion plus industry, and it's another big record keeping problem. So traditionally, the way supply chain works is that there are documents like bill of lading, letter of credit, the export-import documents, which are being FedExed or shipped all across the globe. Then there are different intermediaries, different parties like the importer, the exporter, the importer's bank, the exporter's bank, the port authorities, the regulatory authorities, DGFTs, etc. So n number of people involved, n number of documents which need to be exchanged. And the traditional process of start of an export consignment to the settlement, right, where the funds actually come to the exporter, it's almost a 60 to 90-day cycle. And that I'm talking about in a good situation, in the best case scenario. There are situations where the cycle even extends to 5 to 6 months. Now, this entire process, this entire situation can be overcome by blockchain. So we'll see a quick and short video, which will show one of the use cases, one of the actual implementations done by an organization in this space, where they used blockchain to facilitate supply chain process. So let me just play that video for you guys.
Global trade functions much as it has since the introduction of the shipping container in 1956. Manual paper-based processes are still common, and information about the status of goods is locked away in organizational silos. Today, 90% of goods in global trade are carried by the shipping industry, with the supply chain slowed by the complexity and sheer volume of point-to-point communication across a loosely coupled web of land transportation providers, freight forwarders, customs brokers, governments, ports, and ocean carriers. IBM and Maersk are addressing this problem with a distributed, permission platform accessible by the supply chain ecosystem designed to exchange event data and handle document workflows. Maersk and IBM are employing blockchain technology to create a global, tamper-proof system for digitizing trade workflow and tracking shipments end-to-end, eliminating frictions, including costly point-to-point communications. The collaboration will launch with the potential ability to track millions of container journeys per year and integrate with customs authorities on selected trade lanes. In a recent test by Maersk, shipping a single container of flowers from Kenya to the port of Rotterdam resulted in a stack of nearly 200 communications. Using this example, we will examine how blockchain has been implemented to create trust and security in the digitized document workflow and improve the efficiency of global supply chains. Here we can see each distinct entity involved in the transaction: the growers, export authorities, ports, customs, and importers. Shipping from the port of Mombasa requires signatures from 3 different agencies approving the export and 6 documents that describe the origin, chemical treatments, quality of the produce, and customs duties. Firstly, using a PC or mobile device, the Kenyan farm submits a packing list that becomes visible to all participants. This action initiates a smart contract that enforces an export approval workflow between the 3 agencies. As each agency signs, the status is updated for all to see. Simultaneously, information about the inspection of the flowers, the sealing of the refrigerated container, the pickup by the trucker, and the approval from customs is communicated to the port of Mombasa, allowing them to prepare for the container. All actions relating to the documents and the physical goods are captured and shared: which documents were submitted, when and by whom, where the flowers are and who is in possession of them, and the next steps in their journey. Flowers are perishable, so it's crucial that there are no delays or missteps. Blockchain provides secure data exchange and a tamper-proof repository for these documents and shipping events. This system could significantly reduce delays and fraud, saving billions of dollars annually. And according to the WTO, reducing barriers within the international supply chain could increase worldwide GDP by almost 5% and total trade volume by 15%. For more information on how IBM can help make blockchain right for your business,
So as you guys saw, it again has a huge value in supply chain, whether it's trade finance, whether it's supplying of medical goods. All of them are continuously using this technology. They're looking at this technology in a very serious manner in order to reduce costs, make the entire process transparent, and eliminate the unnecessary use of intermediaries and third parties so that they can make the entire process complete in a timely manner. In fact, a similar use case was implemented by our organization, Set Development, as well. And upon running the POC, the analysis that we did, that my company did, it showed that in this use case for trade finance, we were able to reduce the cost by over 50%. And that's a huge amount of cost saving, just from the trade finance or from the supply chain perspective. And this is considering that we assume only a few parties using blockchain. As more and more parties start joining this platform, as more and more parties start using this technology, the cost saving can be tremendous. So blockchain is not a technology that you can use in your own silos. Assume something like email. Now, just because I have an email doesn't make it beneficial for me unless and until my friends, my family, my co-workers, my business partners, they're all using those email accounts so that I can send and receive emails. So same thing is with blockchain as well. You cannot implement it in your own silos, in your own organizations, and say that, okay, you're getting the benefits of blockchain. Multiple parties need to come together. They need to collaborate and start using blockchain together in order for the value to be realized. And that's the core about blockchain. That's the basis about blockchain technology.
It's truly fascinating, this example, and I love the video in terms of how it started with all the paperwork and what the normal process would follow versus making use of blockchain. And I really enjoy your point about it not being possible in silos. It's really about the collaboration and the efficiency you can get out of it in terms of the cost saving, and the mere value of using blockchain becomes huge. So we can really see what are the economic benefits of blockchain from a return on an investment perspective. I think for any business, this is going to be a key question.
Right. So from a return of investment perspective, basically, as you can see in the cross-border remittance use case or in the trade finance use case, we've seen significant cost savings. And that is how companies are looking at it. The general procedure that we follow as an organization when we go to implementation, initially we do the consultation sessions to understand their current process, how blockchain will fit into their industry, because blockchain is not a plug and play solution. You cannot just take the technology, plug it into your current infrastructure and say that, okay, you've started using it. Implementing blockchain basically means that you're removing a core piece of your existing infrastructure and then deploying blockchain. So the general process is that we start with the POC with limited number of parties, limited number of data, and we start running that process. And once that process has been executed, then we start doing a comparison. So what would the cost be using their legacy system, and what is the cost using the current blockchain-based system? And that's how, in the previous example, how we saw the 33% cost savings, or in this example, when we saw 52% cost saving for this particular client of ours who we were working for. That is how they determine the return on investment. So for these organizations, it's not just the money that they earn. Even the money that they save is actually a profit. It's actually a return on their investment. So that is how they judge whether implementing something like blockchain is going to be beneficial for them or no, especially over a long term. So blockchain is not something that you implement today and say that, okay, in a month you have started making profits out of it. It's a long-term investment. It's 1 year, 2 years, 5 years down the drain, but over a period of time, the cost savings from blockchain technology are immense, and that cost saving actually turns into a return on investment.
It's incredible. And I think it must be such a fascinating process to be a part of, to see that and start mapping that. It must be incredibly interesting. You've shared some fantastic examples with us, and thank you. I think it makes our learning so practical. But do you perhaps have some more examples for us of different industries that are making use of blockchain at the moment?
Sure. So let me talk about one more example. This time I'll take the example of KYC. So KYC stands for Know Your Customer. Whether you go to a bank to open a bank account, or you go to a telecom company to buy a SIM card, or you go to rent an apartment, there's something called as KYC that the people do. So basically they take your identity proof, they take your address proof, and they record it to ensure that you are actually who you say you are. And that process is called KYC. Now, by definition, KYC is quite a repetitive process. Just to give you an example, suppose I go to a particular telecom company to purchase a SIM card. At that point, I have submitted all my documents to them. I have done my entire KYC. They have verified me. And now I am in their ledger. I'm in their database with all my documents there. Tomorrow, if I go to buy another SIM card from a different vendor, they will follow that same procedure all over again. Even if I change the industry vertical from a telecom company, if I go to a mortgage company, or if I go to get a loan, or if I go to purchase a car, they will also do the same KYC over and over again. So I have to keep submitting the same documents again and again. It's a menace for me. Plus, at the same time, each of these organizations are spending their resources, time, and money in doing that same process over and over again. But with blockchain used in KYC, what these organizations can do, and once a particular company has completed my KYC, a unique token can be initiated on that platform. And that token can be shared by me to any of the other organizations, which proves that my KYC has been completed, my documents have been submitted, they have been verified, and I am actually who I say I am. So if multiple organizations come together, you can imagine the amount of cost savings, something that every organization does. Suppose I buy 2 SIM cards, I buy 1 car, I open 3 bank accounts, and probably I take 1 mortgage. So that is almost 10 KYCs. If this 10 KYCs are split between 10 different organizations, the 5 different organizations, their cost becomes 1/5. So that is the amount of cost saving that these organizations can do. They can reduce their cost of conducting this KYC by almost 80%. And it can be even more as more and more organizations start coming on the same platform. So that's another use case of this technology. There are various other industries who are looking into blockchain. You have the healthcare industry, where they're looking at a track and trace of medical supplies and medicines to overcome counterfeit medicines. You have the government organizations who are looking at securing land titles and securing other important government documents. You have the music industry, which is trying to automate the royalty payments with complete transparency. So every industry is now starting to look at blockchain. Every industry is serious about this technology. It's serious about this entire process, basically. So shall we move on to the market outlook?
Absolutely, yes, please.
Sure. So from a market outlook perspective, it's expected that in the coming years, so say about the next 4 to 5 years, this technology is going to grow by almost 70% CAGR. And that's the amount of growth that is expected out of this technology. Again, talking about a point I made earlier, from an industry perspective, every industry is using this technology: financial services, government, healthcare, media and telecom, entertainment, retail, transportation and logistics, travel, and various other industry verticals are flocking towards blockchain technology. Companies are expected to save billions of dollars. We've already seen the return on investment numbers for just a handful of use cases. And if you multiply that at a global level, at a global trade level, that amounts to billions of dollars. And keeping that in mind, already over $10 billion has been invested in this technology up until 2018. And those investments are just multiplying over the years. There are over 1,000 startups in this space who are trying to build different solutions, different products, and different industry sectors are being targeted by these startups. Also, from a job perspective, based on an analysis which was done by a few job search websites, for every 5 blockchain job openings that they had, there was only 1 developer or 1 blockchain consultant that they had available. So the ratio is pretty huge. That shows the amount of demand and the scarcity of the supply. So that gap, the supply demand gap, is pretty huge. And this gap is going to stay this way because the legacy programs, the legacy university programs and degrees, they do not cover these kind of emerging technologies to great extent. They are still, a lot of them are based on traditional scope, traditional syllabus, and these technologies, they do not have enough history for institutes to start covering it, which is why programs like the one offered by Regenesys can actually come in handy to help lower this gap, help reduce this gap, the the supply demand gap in this industry. Now, before I open it up for Q&A, there is one thing that I always tell all my clients, all the students who I've taught over the years, and everyone who I talk about blockchain. So when they ask me, where do you think blockchain is and where do you expect blockchain to go, I always say that today blockchain is exactly where the internet was in the 90s. Now, back in the 90s, if I came to you and I told you that, hey guys, there's this unique technology where there's something called as the TCP/IP protocol, and you can start exchanging data packets, and that is those exchange of data packets is actually going to result in you being able to book your movie tickets and you being able to book your flight tickets using a handheld device which has no wires attached to it, you would just laugh at me or you would walk me out of your room. But today that is a reality. Today you and I are connected on this platform only because of the internet, only because of these TCP/IP protocols and the data packets that were created, that the technology that was created back in the late 80s and the early 90s. So that is exactly where blockchain is today. Over the years, blockchain is expected to be the next big thing after the internet. So it's a technology that you need to start taking seriously because it's expected that in the next 5 to 6 years, 90% of the software that we use, 90% of the places where we use internet, they are going to use blockchain to some extent or the other. And this is the right time to dive into this technology, to understand what it is, and start venturing into how you could actually benefit from it. Because there have been so many cases in the past where companies, they forgot to adopt new technologies, they forgot to innovate, and they have really lost their ground. If you consider companies like Nokia, at one point in time, they were a major mobile phone suppliers. They were on top. The other name, the synonym to mobile phones was Nokia. Today, people have completely forgotten Nokia. In fact, today's generation, people who are just starting to come to college or starting to come to school, they won't even know that there's something called as Nokia, because the iPhones, the Apple and the Samsungs have taken over. Another good example is Blockbuster. At one point in time, they were the suppliers of DVDs and CDs, and they had the entire home entertainment industry, the home entertainment market. And during their peak, it was offered. So they had the offer to purchase Netflix for a reasonable amount of money. And they just laughed Netflix out of their room. And today Netflix has taken over the entertainment industry, and Blockbuster is nowhere. All these companies, they forgot to innovate. They were at their peak, but innovation is important. That is where blockchain really comes into the picture. It allows you to innovate, and it's the perfect time to start looking at it, because 5 years down the line, blockchain will take over the industry. And at that point, you might be left behind if you don't start looking at it seriously now. So with this, I come to an end of my presentation. I'll open it up for Q&As. Any questions, Robin? Over to you.
Thank you so much. And I think we all heard your message loud and clear. Now is the time to really get into this. Now is the time to start developing our understanding for our organizations, for our own businesses. Otherwise, we're going to be left behind the curve, which I'm sure no one wants. We've got quite a few questions coming in. So thank you, Nikhil. One is, and you did mention it, it's not a plug and play solution, right? I can't just go here, one size fits all for my business and slot it in. You did mention a little bit of the timelines kind of involved, but if you could just take us through as almost a high level kind of process view of what it looks like if you start engaging with blockchain within your business on a particular area.
So depending on what kind of use case we are looking at, it takes about the first 1 to 2 months to understand their legacy systems and how blockchain will fit in. Because as I said, it's a custom solution. So every blockchain implementation that we do, it's a custom solution that we are doing for that we are implementing for the clients. So it takes 1 to 2 months on the consultation phase, how they want to go about it, what their partners are doing. Because as I said, there are multiple partners who have to come on board the same technology. So if they are using some platform already, if they have certain preferences and the entire roadmap is built in say about 6 to 8 weeks, then we start the POC process, which can take anywhere between 3 to 5 months to execute, right from the initial development phase to the first deployment to its testing and to completing that POC phase. And once that phase is over, then we go into the production. So the production can take another 3 to 4 months, depending on what kind of production environment we are using, how many participants are we bringing on board. And from that phase onwards, from the first production phase, it's an ongoing process because they keep getting new partners, they keep upgrading the software, they keep upgrading the underlying technology, keep adding features to it. So from there, it becomes an ongoing process. So I would say if you start today, you can get till a POC in about 6 months, and then another 3 to 5 months to the production environment, from where it becomes an ongoing situation.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a question here about how do you see the synergies between blockchain and robotics, process automation, and other forms of automation?
Sure. So blockchain is the underlying technology. It's the backend framework. One point that I would like to make over here is that whether a particular bank or a particular institution, they are using blockchain or no, it's not going to be made evident to the users. So from a user's perspective, the platform, the software is still going to work as it is. It's the backend that blockchain works on. And after implementing blockchain at the backend, it's not just robotics, but it's artificial intelligence, even IoT, and some of the other technologies. The way they work in legacy systems, in the similar manner, for the same advantages, they can be integrated with blockchain platforms as well. So certain processes, if you need to automate them, you can still continue using the RPA schemes, the robotic process automation schemes, integrate with your blockchain platforms and continue using them the way you use in legacy systems.
Okay, very interesting. There's a question, and you did mention quite earlier on around the safety around using blockchain, but there is a question on the chances of hacking blockchain and the kind of level of destruction that could possibly occur should there be a hack.
Sure. So let me start by the Bitcoin blockchain. In over 10 years, that platform still hasn't been hacked. Now, when I talk about hacking, I'm talking about the core blockchain. But one more point over here to notice that when the entire Bitcoin blockchain had started, the white paper that was created, it made it quite evident that the keys, the private keys, which are the equivalent of your passwords in legacy systems, they need to be kept private. If you share that key with anyone, then that person actually owns your account on this platform. So on the platform, it's practically impossible to actually hack it or to take the data. But if you store your key on some legacy databases and that legacy database is hacked, then your entire platform is also compromised. So if these basic precautions can be taken by the institution, if these basic precautions can be taken by the users who are actually using, who are actually running this platform, then the possibility of hack is practically zero. But yes, you need to be cautious about these rules, these basics which come around blockchain.
That makes complete sense. Thank you. Nikhil, if I'm in an organization where I'm key to strategy, I'm driving where we want to be as an organization, what kind of skills do I need to possess to be proficient in blockchain, or to be a blockchain expert, in order to inform business strategy, but bearing in mind I perhaps do not come from a technical background?
Sure. So eliminating the technology part, as a blockchain professional or as a blockchain consultant, a key aspect that you need to understand is you need to have a good knowledge of different blockchain platforms. So right from starting with Bitcoin blockchain to Ethereum, Hyperledger Fabric, and maybe one or two other platforms if you're interested, but at least these three platforms, because these three platforms, they give you an entire history of this entire this concept of blockchain, right from Bitcoin blockchain, what its advantages were, why it wasn't ideal for enterprise situations, what Ethereum gave to the market, and why the need for something like Hyperledger came into being. So once you have an understanding of the underlying components, and I'm not talking from a technology perspective, I'm talking from a conceptual perspective, concepts like cryptography, which I spoke about, that it's one way hash signature. Once you put it, you cannot reverse engineer it. You don't need to know the code of how to actually generate this hash algorithm, but you need to understand the concept that, okay, the hashing algorithm has this advantage. That is when you start understanding the advantage of blockchain and how you can actually put it to use in different use cases, different scenarios. So that is what you need to have a strong grasp on, a strong understanding of, before you start implementing it as a strategy or start discussing it as a strategy for the next 3 to 5 years with your organization.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And thank you for your time. This is such a fascinating topic, and it's very difficult to put it within an hour masterclass, but you've done a fantastic job. And thank you so much for starting by breaking down these concepts for us and really giving us a call to action that now is really the time to start having these conversations and start upskilling ourselves to understand it. Even if we're not from a technology background, there's certain things we can understand to be able to drive this as a strategy within our own businesses. So I thank you for that very much. To our participants, thank you so much for joining us. This is part of a greater introductory to blockchain program that we are running. So if you've loved this session as much as we have and would like to engage further on this journey of blockchain, please do look out for those details. We will be sending you the recording of today's session with some information on our introduction to blockchain course. And because you have all registered and attended today's masterclass, you will be eligible for an early bird discount of 20% if you register before the 29th of April. So please do have a look out for that information. It's going to be a fantastic course. I, for one, cannot wait to learn more and discover more within this field. So thank you, Nikhil, for driving, having a fantastic Sunday evening with us and really getting us thinking about all the possibilities. We've really appreciated having you with us.
Sure. Thanks, Robin. Thank you for having me here. And thanks a lot, guys, for attending this session.